All right. We will begin, as we do, with the questions on the final exam that today's class is going to prepare you for. And I just realized, that's at the end. So bear with me a moment while I get, once again, the device to behave properly, because it does not want to do so. Bump, bump. No. Not there. Bump, bump. Now. Bump. We back up. We are thinking. There we go. The first of the questions. Briefly narrate a conflict and describe the topic, relational, identity, and process goals each party is pursuing. Now I'm going to pause here and say, the format for the final exam in this class we talked about 2 weeks ago, and we said every time you answer an essay question, you give an example. And if the example is specific to you, then that's what gets you the most points. And one thing I didn't think about until yesterday, you also have the assignment that I just called the project, where you're going to take a conflict you either are currently in or you were in the past, and you're going to apply some of what we talk about in the class to explain that conflict. And I realized those two assignments work together. Because when you pick the conflict you were in for the project, you can then use that conflict as your example for the final exam. I'm reminded of that because this essay question is going to ask you, briefly narrate a conflict. I had a roommate, and the roommate used to leave the kitchen in a mess. And then describe the topic, relational, identity, and process goals. And we'll get to talking about that today. Second essay question. Explain the different ways goals change during or after a conflict episode and the effects of a change in goals. Third and finally, and a reminder, the slides are already scheduled to turn visible in classroom at 2:30 today. So if I blow through these too quickly and it's hard for you to write them down, you will be able to get them later. Explain serial conflict and the two categories of goals that the parties tend to pursue. With that in mind, let us start by you imagining that you go to the doctor one day because your stomach hurts. Now, pain in your stomach could be a lot of things. Sometimes you have pain in your stomach just because you have gas. Sometimes you have pain because you exercised and your stomach muscles are sore. Sometimes it's because you worry and you get tense. Some people get pain in their stomach when they worry. It could be something more serious. You have a lot of organs in your body that are in this cavity. There could be something wrong with one of them. The point of this example that I am starting up with is pain in your stomach is just the symptom. And if you go to the doctor will have to learn more to tell you. It could be just you got a lot of exercise and you're sore and that's good and it's healthy, or it could be something serious is wrong. Now, one other thing I want to clarify before we really get down to business. The World Cup is currently going on. Japan scored a good win over Germany pretty recently. And I use pictures like this a lot when I teach this topic in conflict, because this in English is a pun. That's the English word for what happens when you score in football, but it's also the English word for when you work really hard at something, what do you want to happen at the end? So if you join a health club tomorrow and you paid your money and showed up to exercise, they would ask you, well, are you trying to lose weight? Are you trying to get in better shape? Are you trying to have more energy? Do you want to build muscle? Those are all different goals. When you came to college, I assume at some point they asked you, what do you want from college? Do you want to have a job that pays a lot of money? Do you want to learn so much about the world that you understand it better? What are your goals? And when people have a real problem with conflict, commonly husbands and wives do this, sometimes parents and children do it, they may go to a counselor, and the counselor might listen to both parties to the conflict and try to help them handle it better. It's common in the United States. I don't know if it's a common practice in Japan. But what the counselor will often say to the husband and wife or the parent and child is, what is your goal? In pursuing this conflict with this other person, what do you want to achieve in the end? So when I say goal, and when there are jokes about football, it's just because that word has two meanings. To return to the definition that we talked through last week, one of the major elements of conflict is perceived incompatible goals. You perceive that your goal, what you want to have happen in the end, is different from what the other person wants. And not just different, but incompatible means they cannot both happen. They cannot both happen. We might imagine two researchers who were researching brand new medicines, trying to invent a new drug. And they make a huge discovery. It is a breakthrough. It can cure all kinds of diseases. But the problem is, their goals as researchers are different. He wants to make a lot of money. And you can make a lot of money selling medicine. She wants to help people who are in pain. And in particular, she likes helping people who are poor. Now remember, the two of them worked together in inventing this new medicine. They both own it. He wants to make a lot of money. She wants to help poor people. Those goals are not compatible. Because if she gives the medicine away to poor people, every time she does it, he's losing money. But if he raises the price to make lots and lots of money, poor people can't afford it. So they have different goals, but more importantly, their goals are not compatible. So they have a conflict. Now, the other thing that this example illustrates from that definition from last week, we said conflict happens between people who are interdependent. Interdependent. If each of them, working separately, had invented a medicine, then there would be no conflict. He invented his, he can charge money for it. She invented hers, she can give it away to poor people. No conflict. The fact that they both invented this one, and they have to agree, that's interdependence. That's where the conflict happens. All right. That brings us then to the 4 kinds of goals, the 4 categories of goals that a lot of research has demonstrated over the years people tend to pursue when they are working on conflict in the West. The first is the thing they disagreed about to begin with, the thing that caused the disagreement. My visual for it is 2 people in the kitchen. I already mentioned roommates arguing because one leaves the kitchen in a mess. When you start doing the you be the judge assignments, and there are all those columns that ran in The Guardian, you'll find a lot of them are about roommates fighting over who's going to clean up the kitchen. That's a major source of conflict in the West. We call that goal the topic goal. The topic goal. The topic goal refers to whatever it is that they first talk to each other and try to solve. I gave the example last week or maybe the week before, can't remember. You want to study because you have a test tomorrow in your hardest class. Your neighbor has an audition for a symphony orchestra and needs to practice their trumpet. So they need to play the trumpet loudly, but you need it quiet so you can study. So you go and you ask them, please be quiet so I can study. They say, I can't be quiet. My career could be changed if I am accepted for this symphony orchestra. That's the topic goal. You want quiet. They want to practice their trumpets. We start with this one because here is something I said at the first class meeting, but I need to repeat it. We have lots of little conflicts in our lives that we solve. Lots of little conflicts that are not a big deal. Whenever you're in the train station and you're headed for the platform your train is going to leave from, and someone else is coming through the station in a hurry and they're about to run right into you, that's a conflict. You both want to go the straightest path, but your 2 paths are going to collide. Are going to collide. But it's an easy conflict to fix. You just take about 2 steps out of your way and you dodge them. I say that to say, we deal with the easy conflicts and we don't even remember them. Most of the time, if this is all that's going on, if you just need to agree on who's going to keep the kitchen clean and what their responsibilities are, those conflicts are pretty easy. Sometimes not. Here we are at a college. I have worked at colleges all my life. Sometimes there are 2 or 3 professors, each in charge of a program, and each gets an amount of money to do the program. That's their budget. But maybe the college doesn't have as many incoming students as in the past, and the budget gets smaller. 2 different professors each want money because they're responsible for a program and there's just not that much money to go around. So the conflict is, the first professor wants money, the second professor wants money, there's a limit to how much money there is. And that might be the difficult part, the one they have to think hard about how to solve. In that example, that would be the topic goal. But most of the time, solving the topic goal does not solve the problem. What the topic goal often does is it reveals to the parties in the conflict that they have other problems. They have other problems that they need to address. I don't know if you have ever done this. If you've ever sat down in a chair and the chair looked fine, but when you put your weight on the chair, you discovered it was broken? What the topic goal often does is it shows you there is something wrong that you and the other party need to deal with. And the topic goal, the conflict about who will clean the kitchen, about are you going to practice the trumpet when I'm trying to study, all that did, to go back to our definition one more time, it's the first time the two of you expressed to one another, the first time the two of you actually talked about something that's been going on that needs to get taken care of. All right. The topic goal then is what gets you talking. Now, before I go on to the other three goals, I want to show you a few things from last week. I want to show you this. This was from last week when we talked about management and how to make offshore oil platforms produce a lot of oil. A manager who was a produce or perish manager was the kind who worked their workers really hard. A manager who was a country club manager was really, really protective of their workers and took good care of them. So the y-axis, the vertical one, is about producing. It's about getting what you want. The x-axis, the horizontal one, is about taking care of people. Then a little while after that, we transferred this to conflict styles. We said fighting is about getting what you want. The other person wants to practice their trumpet when you need to study. So you yell at them until they say, all right, you can study. And then the horizontal axis, yielding, that is about taking care of the relationship. I'm going to give in and let you have exactly what you want, because then there will be peace between us. And what I want you to remember right now, this axis is about get what you want. That axis is about take care of people. By the end of class last week, we've gotten here with face negotiation theory. This axis was about how people behave in conflict when their concern is self-face. I want to be thought of as a fair person. I want to be thought of as a hardworking person. I want to be thought of as an attractive, likable, fun person. And this conflict is making me think other people might doubt that I'm a hard worker, or that I'm fair, or that I'm fun. I will therefore defend, I will yell and scream about my feelings, and I will fight. Then down here, this was about behavior that people show when other face is their concern. This person who matters to me, this conflict is going to make them uncomfortable and insecure. I will therefore avoid it. I will therefore give in. I will ask an outsider to get involved to defuse the conflict, because I need to have a good relationship with them. I want you to keep what these two axes were about in all three of those examples. I want you to keep that in mind as we talk about the goals. Goal number one, or goal number two. Topic goals was goal number one. Here's number two. Number two is the relational goal. The relational goal. And my visual is a mother and a daughter. An adult daughter and a mother of an adult daughter. Sometimes what really is the problem is not who left the kitchen in a mess. It's the relationship between the two parties. Commonly, one of the examples that may help you think about this clearly is this happens between parents and children. A parent might tell the child, take your clean laundry and put it away. Don't leave it out everywhere. And they may have a conflict over that for a while and eventually settle it, but then a new conflict comes up. Because the child is getting older, the child does not like being treated as a child and keeps trying to make their own decisions. And when you take care of one thing they disagree on, another one pops up. And if you take care of that one, another one will pop up. And really, what that mother and daughter may need to sit down and talk about is, what do we want out of our relationship? It seems like we just disagree all of the time. In parent-child relationships, sometimes what the parent wants, the parent may want the child to obey them and respect their authority. The child may want for the parent to be more warm, more affectionate. The child might want the parent to give them more support. Here are the things I want to do with my life. I want you to be enthusiastic and help me while I do them. The child might say, I want you, parents, to give me room to go out and explore and learn things on my own. All of those might be goals that the two parties have for their relationship. But if they just take every individual fight that they have, what time are you coming home? Are you going to switch from the job you have to a better job? I think you should study now. You need to put your things away and start studying. All those individual fights, you try to tackle them one by one, but they're all just symptoms that the relationship is not where it needs to be. We also find in research, sometimes this is the problem when close friends fight. You might have a best friend, and you might go through a time when you have problems getting along. Some of the relational goals people have for best friends. I want my best friend to be supportive. And whatever I am doing or am excited about, I want my friend to be excited with me. I want my friend to be fun. When I am with my friend, I want that time to be enjoyable. I want my friend to be someone around whom I can relax. When I'm with my friend, I can just be myself, and I don't have to be on my best behavior. I want, when I'm with my friend, to feel safe, that I can even be on my worst behavior and my friend will still accept me. Those are just a few examples, just a few of the many goals people might have in a friend relationship. And as with the mother-child, the mother-daughter, they might find that they have one disagreement with their friend and they work it out, and all of a sudden another one pops up and they work it out, and another one and another one. And really what they need to do is sit down and talk about their relationship. And I haven't even gotten to the biggest example, and the biggest example is romantic relationships. Married couples. Girlfriend, boyfriend. What is it that you want from a spouse? What is it that you want from a partner? Do you want traditional gender roles? Do you want an equal partner? Do you want someone that you spend a lot of time with? Or do you want someone you can count on, but the two of you have separate lives, separate circles of friends? Lots of different goals. And for everything I've talked about, parent-child, friend-friend, romantic partners, where it really gets tricky is when the two of them, when their goals don't match. If you have romantic partners and one of them wants to spend a lot of time together, the other one wants them to be able to count on each other but be pretty independent, you have a problem. You can't have them both. So the topic goal is the event the happening that tells you something is going on that needs your attention. As we said before, a lot of conflicts are easy. They get taken care of. But when you notice you're having one conflict after another and they're not being taken care of, the next place to look is to your relationship. The third category of goal is the identity goal. The identity goal. This is the visual I used last week when we talked about Stella Ting Toomey's face negotiation theory. This was my visual for face. Because that's what an identity goal is. You have things about you that you want other people to acknowledge. You want other people to assure you that you are likable, that you are enjoyable. You want other people to include you in a positive way. And when other people don't behave in a way that confirms your identity, that's when you have the most vicious conflicts of all. There's a researcher at Dartmouth College. His name is Brendan Nyhan. And I'm going to give you the name because sometimes I tell students about this and they're interested enough they want to read more. He recruited, for a study that he did, he recruited mothers who had made the decision not to get their babies vaccinated against childhood diseases. Now, this was before COVID, a good 5 or 6 years before COVID. If I remember right, he published his first study around 2012, so 10 years ago. In came all these mothers, and he made a presentation to them. Well, first of all, he asked them, scale of 1 to 10, how safe do you think vaccines are for your child? 1 is not safe at all, 10 is very safe. And then the second question, scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to get your child vaccinated? And as they came in the door, on the first question, they said, on average, about a 4 or a 3 out of 10, not very safe, and about a 3 out of 10, I'm not very likely to get my child vaccinated. So he then presented a lot of the science of vaccination to them and showed them vaccination is not only very safe, but it's necessary. If you don't get your child vaccinated, they could die. And even if they don't die, they could be put through incredible pain. They could suffer things like going blind, being paralyzed. And at the end of the presentation, he asked them the same 2 questions. First question, scale of 1 to 10, how safe do you think vaccines are? And this time the average was 8 out of 10. They're safe. Second question, how likely are you to get your child vaccinated? And their answer to the second one, 2. On the way in the door, they said 3 out of 10. After they listened to his presentation, they went down. They were less likely to get their child vaccinated, even as they admitted vaccines were safe and their child needed them. Nyhan published this, and he called it the backfire effect. The backfire effect. He said you have to be careful when you try to persuade people, because what he thinks he did that day, all these mothers, their identity was tied up in, I am a good mother. I do things that keep my child safe. And he had very publicly shown them that they were being bad mothers and they were endangering their children. And at the end of that presentation, they agreed with him, but they hated him. They thought he was correct. Vaccines are safe and even necessary, but their identity had been undercut. And that's why they said, I'm not getting my child vaccinated, even if you're right. So I say all that to say, when people feel their identity is being undercut, that is when conflict can get really, really vicious. A lot of people in the United States, at the top of their priorities in how they think of themselves, they want everyone to think of them as a very honest person. I am very honest. I am very truthful. I am a person with integrity. And so, in a conflict, if you suggest they're being dishonest, that undercuts their identity, and you may find the conflict suddenly gets really, really angry and hostile. So what we know is, often one of the ways to make conflict go more smoothly, think hard about what you know of the other party. Think about how they identify themselves and try to show them that you see them that way too. I have had students who I could see from the way they behaved and the way they talked, they took pride in being hard workers. And I've had them come and talk to me and they're unhappy about something happening in class, a grade they got on an assignment. They were assigned to do an activity with a classmate. Whatever it is, they were unhappy with me. And I make it a point to say, you and I both know what a hard worker you are. I've seen what a hard worker you are, and I appreciate how hard you work. And those conversations always go better. They think of themselves as a hard worker, and I tell them, I see that too, and I agree. You are a hard worker. And when their sense of identity is strengthened because we agree about it, then whatever they were going to talk about at the beginning, the grade on the assignment, which was the topic goal, they have an easier time with how that gets worked out because I have reinforced their sense of their identity. All right. The fourth of the goals is the process goal. The process goal. Sometimes the problem with dealing with the conflict is not, as we said before, the topic at all, but it's the way it was handled. This is also common with married couples and with parents and children. With married couples especially, because they grew up in separate households and they learned how to handle conflict from their own families. But the wife and the husband grew up in different families and learned different things. So one of them might get angry and loud when they don't like something because that's what they saw growing up. Everyone in their family got angry and loud. The other one might be careful to be very polite, to sit down, to be calm, to hold back and be gentle, because that's what they saw growing up. And in my example, the first one might think that's dishonest. You don't really feel gentle and polite with me. You're mad at me. So just tell me you're mad. We're married. I can take it. I love you. I'm not going to divorce you if you get mad at me. But when they disagree about how are we going to handle this, there's one column in the You Be the Judge assignment where a man writes in because he says, every time my girlfriend and I get in an argument, she walks away and says she has to cool off. And it's driving me crazy. They have, I'll give you this if you want to do the assignment on that particular column, they have a process problem. It's not any particular topic. When they have a conflict, it's how they handle it. So sometimes, when different things, you have disagreements over different things, one after another, sometimes the problem that needs to get worked out is when you have these conflicts, how are the two of you communicating with each other? Now, I showed you the tables from last week, and I highlighted, this is about getting what you want. This is about taking care of the other person. And I probably should have also mentioned, on this table, there are 5 different conflict styles. Now, with that in mind, let's review what we've talked about. There are relationship goals, taking care of the other person. There are identity goals, getting what you want. Or face negotiation, this one is self-face. And the identity goal is explicitly about face. And then finally, there are process goals. Each of the 5 words on this screen describes a process. You deal with the conflict by compromising, by fighting, by yielding, by collaborating, or by avoiding. So when we talk about the goals that you need to address to get some of your conflicts under control, we're really restating what we said last week about the conflict styles and how they are organized. All right. That should, I hope, answer everything for the first essay question on the final exam that we looked at today. The topic goal, the relational goal, the identity goal, the process goal, could you label them given a conflict? Just to make sure, though, and because we did a great job last week of having some questions, some really good questions, I'm going to pause here before I get to the next thing. And if you have questions you've been wanting to ask me about this would be a good moment. Yes? You, son. Okay.
The first one is the definition about process goals. You mentioned that a column you'll be the judge.
Right.
Like a boyfriend just got crazy about his girlfriend's way when they have a conflict.
Right.
So is the process goals means the way to fix conflict?
The process goal means what habits or behaviors of communication do you use whenever you talk about conflict? The one example was you walk away and cool off. The girlfriend, she always needs to walk away and cool off, and he hates that. Another one that I have heard talked about repeatedly is sometimes one party to the conflict will ignore a lot of little problems until they get so frustrated that all of a sudden they list off to the other party, here's the 20 things you've done in the past week that drove me crazy. I'm mad at you about this and about this and about this and about this. And the other party will say, well, I wish you had told me at the time when I could do something about it. And that pattern shows up over and over again. They don't say anything, and then they explode. A good way to think about what we mean by process goals is to jump back one more time to that. Because some people, whenever there is a disagreement, they say, okay, I will make this change if you'll make this change, and we'll meet in the middle. And they do that every time. Some people, every time, just to keep everybody happy, they give in. These are not necessarily processes themselves, but they're kind of broad categories of process. So the definition would be, what behavior or pattern of behavior do you use when a conflict comes up? And Yusan, you said 2 questions?
Yes.
Yeah, what's your other?
Another one is, so I think that if a conflict just happens, I think there are so many goals mixed up
Yes.
in one conflict. So am I right in this kind of sense?
You are absolutely right. And that's the next thing we're going to talk about, which is why I'm not going to go into the long version of why you're right just yet, because I'm going to pause here and see if other people have questions about the topic, relation, identity, and process goals, because that is its own essay question. As always, If a question occurs to you a little later on, raise your hand, interrupt me. I am used to being interrupted. I actually enjoy it because I love a good question. So if your question becomes clear 5 minutes from now, we will come back and talk about these goals because the important thing is that you learn. All right. I am going to park this on a blue screen. Oh, wait a minute. I do have visuals for this. I didn't think I did. The next thing to talk about, the goals you have in conflict pretty commonly can change. The goals change. And they may change during a conflict episode. Speaking of which, I probably better define that. I realize that's not on the visuals either. But it was in one of the essay questions. Episode. Most common use of the word episode in English is a TV show broken up into episodes. A conflict episode refers to one of two things. Either where the topic goal was the dirty kitchen. Let's say you come home and you leave the kitchen a mess and your roommate gets mad, shakes her head and says, I'm going to kill my roommate. That's an episode. Or your roommate confronts you and says, the kitchen's always a mess. I can't live like this. Who brought you up? And you say, I know, but you're a clean freak. And you talk and you figure something out and then you go off to do your own thing. That's an episode. You had a talk. Maybe not a very friendly talk, but you had a talk. So either the thing that is the topic goal, them practicing their trumpet when you're trying to study, that's an episode. Or you talk about it. You confront each other and you talk. That's an episode. If it's either of those, it's an episode. But the thing that makes it an episode is it is a one-time event. It has a quick beginning, middle, and end. A good way to think of it might be, not only does it all take place in one day, but it all probably takes place in under an hour. If it takes longer than that, it's more than one episode. It's something limited by time. Now I say that because when we talk about changing goals, sometimes what happens, goals change because in the middle of a conflict episode, one party understands something they didn't understand before. This takes one of two forms. Either you didn't know what your goal was, but suddenly in the middle of the conflict, suddenly you know what it is. Maybe you thought it was just that the person you're married to spends too much money and never talks to you before spending it, and you have to talk with them about how they're spending money. And in the middle of the conversation, you realize they always treat you disrespectfully, and all of a sudden you think, this is the problem. I want you to treat me with respect. And it was talking about the issue that makes that other goal pop into existence. You wanted it, but you didn't really know. I don't know if that's something that's ever happened to you. I know that people who go for counseling in the United States for problems with conflict, they realize all of a sudden, this is what I want. And I didn't know until I was talking to my partner. This is what I want. The other thing that sometimes happens in the middle of an episode is you get new information from something the other person says, and that changes your goal. You get new information, and that changes your goal. So, for example, you might be arguing with your best friend about how your best friend always makes plans with you and at the last minute drops out of them and you get disappointed. And they might tell you, well, actually, there's someone I met at work and I've been going and doing fun things with them, and I hate to tell you, but they're really my best friend now. And you didn't know that before. And it comes out of the episode, and maybe your relationship goal is now different. Before, you wanted them to treat you as a best friend. Now, you're one of many friends they have. you are lower on the priority list. Now you just want some common courtesy. You want them to show good manners. And the difference between the two, the first one, you kind of just had emotions swirling around in your head. But the conflict lets you focus and decide what you really want. The second one, they tell you something. They tell you a fact that you didn't know before, and it changes what your goals are. Do we get that? How those are different? Okay. There's one other way goals change, and it is not in the middle of an episode. It's after an episode. After an episode. When conflict episodes end, typically, people are left with very strong emotion. Now, sometimes the emotions are positive. Sometimes you talk about the conflict, it goes really well, you feel really relieved, and you really love this other person and you're thankful they're in your life. Sometimes. Sometimes you fight over what the conflict is about until one of you gets sick of it and just leaves. And the other one is left feeling angry. And what then Westerners do, very well documented, they change their mind about what their goal was to begin with. They will almost rewrite history. It gets researched under a topic in the social sciences called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance. Bear with me 1 second. Maybe you are the parent of a teenager, and maybe you went in to have the talk with your teenager thinking, what I really want is for us to be close. When you were a small child, you used to climb up in my lap and cuddle with me, and for many years I was your hero and you looked up to me. And now we just fight all the time. I want us to be close again. Some of those arguments turn ugly. And afterward, what parents will sometimes say is, all I really wanted was, I just had a process goal. I just want you to use the manners I taught you. And in the middle of the conflict, it wasn't a process goal at all. What you wanted was to genuinely be close with them, but it was so painful to have that fight with someone that you almost tell yourself, I never wanted closeness with them. They don't want closeness with me. I don't care. I just want them to have good manners. So all three of those. In the middle of conflict, you suddenly realize something you didn't realize before, or the other party gives you information. They tell you something you didn't know before, and that changes your goal. Or you get to the end of an episode and your emotions make you tell yourself that your goal is something that you didn't think it was before. Those are the three fairly well documented examples of how goals commonly change in the middle of a conflict episode. Essay question number 2 asks, how do goals commonly change? That's it. It also asks, what is the effect of goals changing mid-conflict? And the effect is, when your goal changes in the middle of a conflict, commonly you then engage in negative behavior. There's a longer talk we could have, but I've taught entire classes on the idea I'm about to mention now. We do not like, in relationships, we don't like feeling uncertain. We don't like feeling confused. It's not a good feeling to feel that we don't know what's going on. Now, anytime you talk to another human being, because they have their own brains, their own wants, their own thoughts. Some of what they say will surprise you, and little surprises are not that bad. We can take little surprises. But when things are disrupted in a way that's huge to where we decide what I wanted before is not what I want now, we tend to respond badly. That's where we tend to become more verbally aggressive, to become angry, and we tend to manage conflict poorly. So far what we've talked about, the thing that the conflict was originally about may not be what the conflict's really about. It may be that you have to work on your understanding of your relationship. It may be that you feel like who you are, your identity, is being undercut, or it could be that you need to deal with the process differently. And when that changes in the middle of conflict, the conflict tends to go poorly. That brings us then, well, real quick, a recap. I threw this slide in here, so I'll leave that there for a moment. There's the topic goal, the relational goal, the identity goal, the process goal. My English-speaking students back in the United States, their memory trick is TRIP. Spells out TRIP. And that brings us, those are what we call the classic goals. For decades in conflict research, researchers have pursued trying to understand the topic goal, relational goal, identity goal, and process goal. But there is a newer variety that research is proceeding on, and that is what we call serial conflict. Serial conflict. And I could define serial conflict as one topic goal, lots and lots of episodes. One conflict goal, lots and lots of episodes. To translate it into plain English, to speak directly, I could say, if you've ever had an argument with somebody and thought, why are we having this argument again? We've had this argument so many times, and it's always the same argument. Maybe you have a friend who runs late, and it's really inconvenient for you, and you ask them, would you please, if you can't be on time, would you please at least let me know you're going to be late? I will. And then it happens again, and then it happens again, and then it happens again. That's a serial conflict. You just keep having the discussion again and again and again. And we said at the start of class, when poorly managed conflict gets to the point where you bring in a counselor, often they will ask, what is your goal? What are you trying to accomplish? Research into serial conflict has focused on when people bring conflicts up over and over again, what is their goal? And what the research has found, there are 7 goals, 7 of them. Now, the essay question doesn't ask for all 7, it asks for the categories. So I'm going to take you through the goals pretty quickly and then show you the categories. There is, first of all, in serial conflict, there is mutual understanding. Mutual understanding. Now, that probably sounds not too bad. One detail that I just realized I left out. The research into serial conflict focuses on 2 kinds of relationships. Most of it has been between romantic partners. So married couples, or boyfriend-girlfriend, when they have the same fight over and over again. Recently, the past few years, some researchers are looking into parents and children when they have the same fight over and over and over again. And I keep using the word fight as kind of I use it to mean a conversation about conflict. And that's very sloppy on my part, and I should not use the word fight. It's not a fight every time you talk about a conflict. So maybe two people are romantic partners, and one of them really, really loves sports, and the other one hates sports and doesn't want to waste any time watching or participating in sports. They may have a perfectly healthy, positive relationship, and one of them keep bringing that disagreement up to talk about it because they want to learn the other side's perspective. And that is a pattern that shows up where there is serial conflict. I really wish I understood what it is about football that turns you off so much, because if I could convey to you why I love it so much, we could watch the World Cup together and we would have fun. A second goal that figures into serial conflict is what we can call positive relational expression. Positive relational expression. This is another one of the things, another one of the behavior patterns that shows up a lot with romantic partners in the United States and in the West. They will say to one another, I love you so much, I'm so glad you're in my life, you drive me crazy when you leave your dirty laundry all over the apartment, but you are so good that you're worth it. So they will bring up sometimes a site of conflict, and they'll bring it up repeatedly, even though they've made their peace with it. They know that that conflict is probably never going away, but they will affirm their partner and say, despite the fact that these things happen, you are still wonderful and I'm glad you're in my life. Parents do that with kids, and kids do it with parents. Kids may say, I'm so glad you're my mom. You're the best mom I could have. You're always there in my corner. You worry too much. You nag me a little more than you need to, but you're a great mom. So far, I am betting serial conflict doesn't sound too bad. Well, just wait. Because along with positive relational expression, there is negative relational expression. When relationships are troubled, when relational satisfaction is low, commonly, people will bring up the specific conflicts they've talked about before but never resolved. And they will use them to try to illustrate, this is what I think is wrong with our relationship. This is why, even though we're dating, we're not moving toward getting married. Even though we're married, we don't have the feelings we had for each other in the past. This is why, even though we are parent and child, we're not as close as we were years ago. These things that you do, or these things between us that we have not figured out. I just realized. Then there is, to use a visual from a couple of weeks, actually from last week, sometimes serial conflict is brought up again for the purpose of power and dominance. Power and dominance. I'm not going to say very much about that one because that's next week's topic, all 90 minutes. We are going to talk about, in conflict, how is power split up, and how do conflicts look when they become a power struggle. When you engage in the conflict hoping to get power away from the other partner or overpower them. Sometimes that's what's going on, though. Doesn't tend to happen in healthy relationships, definitely not healthy romantic relationships. In the West, it's very common in parent-child relationships. Almost every parent-child relationship at some point is a power struggle. But that's one goal that comes up. in bringing up serial conflicts yet again. Then there is changing the target. Changing the target. Now, what do we mean by target? By target, we mean effectively the topic goal. The topic goal. So why didn't I use topic goal? Because the researchers who do this work named it target instead. So if the topic goal is that your roommate always leaves the kitchen in a mess, you may bring it up again in more and more creative ways, more and more forcefully, because you tell yourself, this time I'm going to get them to change that behavior. This time I'm going to get them to leave the kitchen clean. And my visual is a parent talking to a child, because that is where bringing up serial conflicts to try to change the target most commonly happens. Parents will be stubborn, and they will go years bringing the conflict up over and over again, thinking, I have to change this kid's behavior. They're going to be a grown-up someday, and they can't do this. 2 more. And they are the 2 that are probably the least cheerful. There is to hurt the other or benefit yourself. Hurt the other or benefit yourself. Where relationships are really, really deeply troubled, you can bring up the conflict, and it's an English idiom, I hope it translates. You can bring up the conflict and you can fling it in their face. This is what you do. This is the bad thing that you do, and you use it as a verbal attack. People do it in very heated, in very unhappy, angry conversations when they have a troubled relationship. And it feels to them like a weapon they can use to win a fight. And the last of the purposes people have in bringing up that kind of conflict is to end the relationship. I don't know that she's ending a relationship, but she's walking away from the camera, so I assume she's walking out of someone's life. You could bring the conflict up and you can say, this is the deal breaker. The reason that I'm not staying in this relationship with you is because of this thing that we have never settled. And we are, in about 2 weeks, the week after next is when we will take the day and talk about the specific research into conflict in romantic relationships. This is where we will talk about cheating. This is where we will talk about fighting over money, which is more likely to end marriages in the United States than any other topic. And those fights often go on for years. And the fights seem very, very repetitive. But certain forces all line up, and there comes a day when one party or the other says, I'm not fighting you on this anymore. Either this is solved or I'm leaving. All right. So I said there are categories because that is what the essay question asks. Here are the categories, and here's what they mean. Mutual understanding and positive relational expression, the first 2 that we brought up. Those are the pro-social goals. The pro-social goals. Pro-social is a good Western social science term. It means you do what you do knowing it will help the other person. So I bring up this conflict we have. You hate sports, you hate playing sports, you hate watching sports, but tell me more about what you don't like. Tell me about how you feel when sports are on, because I want to understand you better, and if I can ever convey to you why I love them, we'll have another fun thing we can do together. That's about helping the other person. Same thing with positive relational expression. Mom, you're a great mom. You worry too much, you nag me too much, but you're the best mom I could have, and you're always there for me. You say things like that to help them. The other category, though, is focused. It's not necessarily to hurt them, although this one definitely is. But it's because with each of these, you remember when we showed the conflict styles, the y-axis is about getting what you want. That's what these are. These are about you need to vent you feel like you need to vent your negative feelings. You need to strengthen your power so you don't lack power. You need to put a stop to their behavior because their behavior is unacceptable to you. Something in you needs to hurt them, or you need to leave the relationship. So those are the categories of behavior. The categories of goal. The categories of goal that motivate people to return to a conflict over and over again. So when you feel like, why are we having this fight again? We've had this fight 1,000,000 times. You may find that that is one of the motives behind it. And when you can isolate what your goal is, you can sometimes make sense of your behavior. And if you see that you've got one of these goals, that's a good moment to stop and say, do I need to do some work on this relationship? If I'm trying to change their behavior to make them stop leaving the kitchen in a mess, am I being self-focused? Do I need to take a big step back and talk with them about what good roommates do for each other? And maybe I need to look at some things I'm doing that make me a bad roommate. And when the two of us have a stronger relationship, then maybe we can talk about the kitchen again. All right, let me make sure I am not missing anything. Into the home stretch. Let me, for the second time today, or maybe the third, pause and ask you, do you have questions you want to ask about the serial conflict goals, or even about the basic conflict goals? Go for it.
Well, it's a curiosity of myself.
Go for it.
So do you know about gaslighting
Yes.
effect?
Yes.
So today, so we talk about romance relationship a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes me remind gaslighting effect.
Right.
So how can you just explain gaslighting effect in this conflict goals?
So, gaslighting ordinarily gets categorized. Okay, gaslighting. Gaslighting, it's based on a movie that was made, I want to say in the 1940s, because I think I can almost remember the name of the star of it, and no, I'm not that old. But there was a husband who was trying to convince, he was playing mind games with his wife. He was manipulating his wife. He wanted her to think that she was mentally ill, and so he was turning down, they had gas lights in their house. Gas burned to make the light, and he would turn it down, and she said, why is it so dim in here? Why are the lights so dim? And he would say, it's not dim, when he was the one doing that to her. Gaslighting, it's a complicated phenomenon. There are a lot of people in unhealthy relationships, often romantic, occasionally parent-child. The one who wants to dominate will get the other one to doubt the evidence of their own eyes. So let's say there's a husband and a wife, and the husband is spending money on alcohol and on gambling and on pachinko, and the wife says, why is there no money in our account? Why is our account so low? I can't buy groceries. And he says to her, we never did have that much money. This was our balance at the beginning of the month. And she thinks, oh, I must have been wrong then. That move right there was gaslighting. And what he's doing is he's taking away her ability to speak up and resist by, in a dishonest and manipulating way, getting her not to trust her own perception of reality. So, where does that fit into all of this? Well, when I talked about the conflict styles last week, I almost included another way of organizing them, believe it or not, because there's one other researcher, Laura Guerrero, who divides fighting into direct fighting and indirect fighting. Direct fighting, if I came and throw a punch, that's direct fighting. But if I yell at you and I say, "Baka desu yo," that's direct fighting. But I can also do things like gaslighting and other things that are passive aggression, and those are indirect fighting. I'm trying to hurt you, but I'm sneaking around and not even admitting I'm doing it. Yeah. So that's where I would fit in gaslighting into the conflict styles. It's a very tiny example in fighting. Is there more out of your curiosity, or do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I think it's really well explained, because I think gaslighting is kind of like conflict, but it
Sure.
is it is hard to notice to this.
Sure.
And also, if one woman or a man just falling into the gaslighting effects,
Right.
he and or she cannot just to have a negotiation with his or
Right.
her partner directly by
That's right.
this. So I'm just curious about this.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Sure. And one thing it made pop into my head, this is something that people joke with each other about in the United States. They joke about the tricks they use to get their young children to behave, because young children will believe almost anything. One trick I've heard a lot of people say is, I told my 2 or 3-year-old child, every time you lie to me, your tongue turns purple. Or actually, no, it's not. It's every time you lie to me, your ears turn purple. And then she can always tell when the kid's lying because they cover their ears. And the problem is the kid keeps growing, and there comes a day that the kid realizes Mom made that up. And then the kid doesn't know if they can trust Mom because Mom makes things up. And that's really pretty troubling, and that's the problem with gaslighting. It may get you what you want in the short term, but it undermines trust. And if I were to take this entire class and boil it down to one idea, it's that conflict is often hard because something is interfering with the two parties trusting each other. If they trusted each other, they would talk about the problem until they worked it out. But they draw back from talking to each other because they don't trust each other, and that's the effect of gaslighting in part. Oh, you're welcome. Does anyone else have any questions about the conflict goals? Either the basic goals or the serial goals? The final thing we will get to, the last few minutes of class. What do you do about all of this? You've taken a lot of notes. How's this going to help you? Well, out of the research into conflict, here is the guidance. First of all, if you find every time you work out a problem with somebody, another problem takes its place, every time the two of you disagree about something and you figure out what to do about it, and then there's a new one, and then there's a new one, that's your clue. There may be something deeper going on. You may try, is there something that's very important to their identity that I could affirm for them? I could tell them, yes, you are a smart person. Yes, you are a talented and capable and lovable person. Could I do that? Could I help them feel more like who they want to be? You do that, and all of a sudden, all the problems go away, or at least get easier to deal with. Or, do you need to think about what kind of relationship do you have with them, and do you need for the two of you to understand what you want a little better? That's guideline number 1. When it pops up repeatedly, stop and ask yourself the question, is a deeper goal at work? Guideline number 2. Ask yourself, what do you want? This comes into the conflict research literature over and over again. Any conflict that is tricky, that is difficult, before you go to deal with it, clarify your own goals to yourself. Stop and take a couple of minutes and think, what do I want a solution to this to look like? Am I maybe getting so upset by this because I feel my own identity is being undercut? Do I feel like they're not showing me enough respect? Do I feel like... I can give you a quick example of this. I was for a lot of years the coach for a debate and public speaking team And I had only been at my current university in the United States for about a year. And we had an event where a lot of my students showed up and they performed for the whole university. And one of the other professors came up to me afterward and said, this one person on your team, why don't you have her do this differently and do this and make all these changes and then it'll be better? And I should have been able to just stay calm and say, well, the reason we don't do it that way is this. But there was a part of me that thought, you know what? I've done this for 20 years. You should show some respect for the fact that I know what I'm doing. And the fact that you just sat here and watched it, and this person was a Bible professor. They didn't know a darn thing about presentation skills. I didn't like the fact that they put their opinions on the same plane as mine. Now, I was wrong to feel that way, and if I were really secure, I would have just kept calm and said, okay, your suggestions are duly noted, but we do it this way because. But honestly, if I'd stopped and said to myself, I'm feeling insecure right now, and I feel like they're treating me disrespectfully, but we can deal with that another time, I wound up having an argument with them, and kind of an ugly one. Yeah. So, stop and clarify your own goals to yourself is the second guideline. And the last of the guidelines. It's very hard to think clearly about any of this in the middle of the conflict. While you are talking with another person about something where you know you disagree, where you know there's something at stake, and where you also know that if you handle it badly, people's emotions may get fired up, it's hard to think clearly in the moment. So what the research says over and over again is deal with your goals outside the conflict. If you need to talk with them about the relationship or about their identity, do that separate from the conflict. If you need to think about your own goals or your own identity, do that before you go to meet and talk with them about the topic goal of the conflict. All right. That brings us to the very end of the discussion of conflict goals. So let me do this one more time and stop me for any of these that you need me to say more. Briefly narrate a conflict and describe the topic, relational, identity, and process goals each party is pursuing. I think it would make sense to use the conflict you pick for the project assignment. And if you get this question, or if you choose this question, just use that conflict. It should fit it perfectly. And because it's specific to you, you'll get full credit. Anyone have anything to ask me about this one? All right. The different ways goals change during or after a conflict episode and the effects of a change in goals. Anything more you need to hear about this one? All right. Wait, that didn't change. Explain serial conflict and the two categories of goals that the parties tend to pursue. Anything you need me to say more about on this one? All right. The instructions for the project say that you are by week 3 to have made a document or to make a document, share it with me,